Okay, hey everybody. Welcome back. Here we are, another session. We're covering chapter 7 this week. This week we're talking about free black people in antebellum America. What is antebellum America? Antebellum America is going to be pre-Civil War America. What did that look like? What did it look like for the free black people that were there? If you're interested in this topic, that's what we're going to be covering today. Friendly reminder before we get started, if you're watching are listening on Instagram Live, you're welcome to jump into the live sessions here. Click the link in my bio, and then it will take you to the Zoom session. You can jump in that way. If you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to like, subscribe, share with your friends. That helps me out a ton. I'm excited to get started here. Let's go ahead and get started. Um, Essentially, yeah, like I said, we're talking about free black people in antebellum America. What did that look like? So the first thing I want to establish here, I literally already just said this, but I want to establish this for the record anyway, is when you hear the word antebellum, it means before a war, right? In the case of the United States, it generally means before the Civil War. That's usually what everyone is talking about when they say antebellum. I've heard different people use this. They often think it's just an arbitrary term to describe or harken back to the emotional sentiments of an arbitrary time in the South or something like that. It's actually a specific term for a specific purpose. I've actually also seen a video of Charlie Kirk incorrectly use this term too. I think I reacted to it in one of my reels. If you want to go and search for it, dig for it, or something like that. Um, the other thing we need to establish here is the term chattel. What does chattel mean? Well, chattel is a kind of over-encompassing, like general term. It's an umbrella term, if you will, to describe movable personal property. So when you combine the word chattel with the word slavery, what we're usually talking about is slavery in the context of treating people, human beings, as movable personal property to be traded, to be sold, to be discarded, to be abused, to essentially do whatever you want to do with those specific people, essentially for the purpose of capitalistic gain, objective trading, whatever you have. Okay, so now that we've established those key terms here, we'll be encountering those fairly frequently, and they're certainly used throughout the book. Let's go ahead and let's dive into this, okay? So the first thing we need to establish when it comes to the circumstance of Black people in the antebellum South, okay, is we've already established several weeks ago, as well as in this class, and I'll remind you for those of you who kind of sporadically jump in here and there, is that at all points in time, both before the founding, the official Declaration of Independence of the United States, as well as in the decades and years after, there were always free black people in North America and what would ultimately become the continental U.S. The first free black people to arrived. They were invited with those who established a settlement in Jamestown. Okay, they were invited to work as indentured servants, and after fulfilling the terms of their contract through labor, they were essentially let go and freed and allowed to go and establish their own lives, do whatever they wanted to. So the descendants of those black people also remained free. Okay, we also had established in this class that from the Revolutionary War, okay, there was an incentive to free black people if they contributed to the war against the British. The North leaned somewhat into fulfilling that promise, which meant that you got a demographic expansion of free black people, especially in the North, rarely in the South. And then after the war in 1812, another British American war encounter. That followed the same pattern of incentivizing black people to participate in a war against the British, and they will grant them their freedom, also meant then that you got further expansion of black people. So there were certain moments throughout American history in which you have black people who were either always free, earned their freedom, bought their freedom, every which way in between. Okay. Now, the number of people of color, and by people of color, I mean mainly black people in this regard. I'm not really talking about the first Americans, so perhaps I shouldn't have used this terminology in my slide. Um, but the number of free, let's say, black people, okay, was around 2.4% demographically, and that's according to census records. Okay. For those of you who don't know, you can do a thing on ancestry.com where you can map out your genealogy through census documents. You can also get some really interesting statistical information based on years, decades, things like that if you dig in the right corners. And so it's about 2.4% of the US population, at least for what we know that's documented, that represent free black people at this point in time. And what point in time am I talking about? I actually haven't gotten to that. So I'll just tell you what point in time I'm talking about is around, let's say, the 1830s. Okay. By the 1830s, this is like the antebellum America. Okay. Most black people, by and large, are freed. And yes, even in the South, there are the rare occasion of like black people who do exist in the South, but do not belong as property to anyone. And in some cases are property owners, business owners. They handle their own affairs. They're largely free. Okay. Now, we already established, I think, in the last chapter that there was a form of urban slavery too, and in that urban slavery, that means that you're going to have a kind of population of individuals who are slaves in these urban city centers, as well as people who are not, right? And so, for free black people, anyway, um, the most free black people tended to live in concentration in these larger urban or urbanized cities. And by urbanized, I suppose I also want to be specific about my language here, because when you think of urban in the contemporary sense, you're thinking of like New York City, Brooklyn, Los Angeles, Chicago, that kind of thing. But we're talking about the antebellum South. So what do I mean when I say urban? Well, what I mean when I say urban here is that a densely concentrated population of people that live around or find, let's say, ecological or geographic stability around a large body of water, right? So you have a large concentration of people whose main mode of living is not necessarily rural based. Okay. That's as far as I can go into specificity there. Okay. Now, in terms of Black people, the absolute largest concentration of Black people in any urbanized area in pre Civil War America is going to be in Philadelphia. So, Philadelphia has a very rich history of African American history, well, the East Coast in general, but Philadelphia mainly, because it's close to DC, but it's still distinct and far away enough that from the expansion of DC, you get these rural populations where Philadelphia still counts as the North. Philadelphia was one of those places in Pennsylvania, one of those states that leaned heavily into freeing the black people that it made that promise um, to free them if they contributed to their war against the British. So this is how you get like demographic concentrations of black people in the urban North. Now, as far as the times, the political times, the economic times, what did that look like? Well, like I said, we're talking about the 1830s. So this is the Jackson era. Andrew Jackson is the president right now. He's the seventh U.S. president. So it's fair to say that there are people who are old enough to have not only witnessed the birth of the United States, but are still alive to have seen the succession of several presidents serving either one or two terms at this time. That there's not a three-term president um, by this time period. Okay. And so during this specific point in time, you have this interesting economic phenomenon that's happening where, due to the slave trade in part, due to the products that are being produced from the slave trade, you have urbanized growth. A kind of market revolution is happening, and it's happening in the North, particularly because this is where you get the kind of industrial revolution. We're not necessarily in the industrial revolution era just yet, but you're starting to get the early seeds of the industrial revolution. Is the South is leaning heavily into the expansion of slavery, the maturation of the slave industry, while the North is mainly positioning itself as being economically responsible for processing all of the goods that are produced from the slave labor in the South. Okay, so this is where you get a kind of boom or an explosion of factories, assembly lines, large working class individuals that are gathering together in specific industrial bodies or buildings. You're getting the expansion, or at least the early seeds of the expansion of like railways, more efficient trading, glass production, brick production, all of those things is expanding and it's improving the United States' ability to position itself as a kind of economic powerhouse and uniquely as the transatlantic slave trade is still going on. Right. So that's what's happening economically anyway. And so in that transition, what you're seeing is that like these factory systems are starting to replace small shops. Okay. And these small shops are, the small shops, I'm sure you've seen one of those antebellum movies before, where you have those people that walk out into the town and they go into a store and there's a guy with the ribbons around his arms or whatever, and he asks them what they want and he goes and gets it and he kind of runs the store and he's an artisan, right? Um, those kinds of stores are starting to get replaced by like massive industrial bodies. Okay. And with these massive industrial bodies, you're getting like a kind of, let's say, a population growth, if you will, of an ever increasing number of like urban working class individuals. So, socioeconomically speaking, this is where we start to see the emergence of like the urban working class in North America. Okay. These are people whose main mode of living and stability is to earn a wage through manual labor. And in earning that wage, are then able to provide stability for their families. Okay. So the North is beginning to distinguish itself from the South in just this kind of industrialized way. And this is where you start to kind of sow the seeds for the early, like, what would eventually lead to the Civil War on the political front is now the North and the South are not just politically diverged on the philosophies of slavery, but it's becoming manifested in their modes of living, right? The ways that they produce their economies. Okay. So they're starting to kind of diverge in this way. Okay. So what you're seeing in this like transition, this market revolution, this divergence is you're starting to see that certain groups of people are developing political identities around their modes of living. And their modes of living and therefore their political ideologies are fundamentally distinct from those in the South. That means that you have people who might be voting in favor of their own personal interests and against the interests of the people in the South who are heavily invested in slavery, right? So there's a need for political representation of this ever growing body of political aspirations and ideologies, especially as the United States of America is still forming, right? Um, so, because in these urban city centers, these populations are becoming more concentrated, they're becoming more politically active. You're noticing that there are economic power plays. It just means that now not only is their socioeconomic mode of living becoming distinguished from the South, but also their political motives are becoming distinguished from the South too. Okay. So I promise we're going to get to what this means for Black people. I have to give you a little bit of the historical context. Okay. So prior to the Andrew Jackson era, around 1810 or so, um, you had this idea that in order for people to vote, they have to be landowners. They have to own a piece of America in order to be able to participate in American democracy. But as you're getting this gradual transitional shift in like urban concentrated city centers, you have large numbers of people, like a growing number of people who are less likely necessarily to be landowners. Does that mean that because they don't own land, that they shouldn't get a vote? They're still white. They're still American. They still have a stake in the American economy and the trajectory that they want to take the country. They need political representation. It doesn't necessarily seem fair. It almost doesn't make sense that the one qualification for allowing people to vote is they just have to own land. So you have lots of people that are pushing now for pushing against this idea that they shouldn't necessarily be disenfranchised. Okay. Um, And so, on this basis, I don't want to say almost immediately, like overnight. It's more like this is a gradual transition, okay? But you have people that are pushing for, we need to figure out like how to change the rules. What are we going to do to change the rules here? Because it doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem American. It almost seems antithetical in this regard. So they're pushing for this idea that like perhaps you want to push for like universal suffrage. Okay, great. Universal suffrage means all Americans get the right to vote, right? And doesn't that make sense? Okay, well, great. Now you have free black people who have been born in America, who only know America, and they have political interests that are fundamentally different from the white people in the North, especially that are different from the white people in the South. Do you really want those black people voting? Do you want them influencing the outcomes of your elections? Well, no. Okay, so then maybe we need to be more specific about the rules we're pushing for when we're changing how American democracy is going to run. And so this is where you get a kind of a slow, growing but substantive push towards universal white manhood suffrage. Okay. At this point in time, there's less, I want to say, less rhetorical emphasis on men. Okay. It's kind of a given at this point in time that like voting is just for men. It's a man related thing. It has to do with leadership. Men belong in positions of leadership. So this isn't really necessarily to like say that there wasn't any entertainment of an idea of like gender inclusion at this time, but it's just kind of known that like if you're a white man, this is what we're trying to use to distinguish you from something like black men when we say universal suffrage. So they're using this language of like universal white manhood suffrage. Okay, so then they're pushing for this idea that if you're a white man, it doesn't really matter if you're a landowner or not, but by virtue of you being white, that should be the criteria that then allows you to vote. Kind of in line with the Naturalization Act of 1790, that what we're calling American and who gets entitled to the rights and freedoms or American citizenship is free white persons. So it's kind of falling in line on those ideas. Now, getting back to the 1830s, as if we're talking about a fundamentally different time. Um, you have this slow expansion of the US growing westward. They're acquiring new territories. Okay. And as they're slowly acquiring these new territories, they're forced to distinguish or determine, rather, not distinguish, but to determine which areas, what the boundaries of these new states are going to be, and then which states are going to be free states and which states are going to be slave states. Recall back to last week where I told you that the United States politically is forced to entertain the idea of designating free and slave states because of its fundamental weakness in ongoing warfare with the British and how the British is exploiting this logistically. But that also the political advocacy in the North is pushing against the expansion of slavery. Some people want it eradicated entirely. Right. So, in order to satisfy both sides being the people who are pro slavery and the people who are anti-slavery or anti-expansion of slavery, you kind of have to go, okay, well, as we're expanding the United States of America, we have, excuse me, we have to debate whether or not these new territories are going to permit slavery or not, to which extent, and can we balance it out? That's the idea. Okay. So at this point in time, you have the Democrat Party, okay? And the Democrat Party mainly dominates the South, okay? We're not talking about the Democrat Party from today, okay? The Democrat Party today is fundamentally different. Yes, we will get to how the parties politically shifted. In fact, this entire class will be the most detailed account of how the political parties switch their values. You will understand every aspect of it, every nook and cranny, I promise you. We'll get there. But for now, I don't want you to think of the Democrat Party of today. I just want you to think of conservatism, okay? Because conservatism is the constant here. They're not conservative right now, but you'll understand what I mean when I say this. When I say conservatism, I want you to think of the traditional notions of conservatism as it superimposes the US, the continental US map, right? Where most conservative states are generally concentrated in the South or the Bible Belt, right? Okay. So what we're calling Democrat right now is just that. Okay. Now, that's the name of the party. Okay. And they are a pro slavery party. Why are they pro slavery? Well, for obvious reasons. They represent the political interests of the people and the constituents in the South who benefit from the institution of slavery, who heavily lean into its expansion. And so, on that basis, they are pro slavery. They are pro slavery because of these reasons, essentially. Okay. So, the hallmark of the Democrat Party at this point in time is appealing to the racial norms of the South. That means white supremacy. It means racial segregation, right? Racial segregation in relation to those free black people, not necessarily segregation in terms of slavery, but yes, a pro slavery platform will inherently be pro segregation. Okay. So all of the ways that you might think of like the open um, I suppose I want to say overt racial dog whistles. I don't even want to call it dog whistles because they're not using codified language at this point in time, right? The word nigger gets thrown around like they're brushing their teeth and drinking water. Okay, so it's a regular thing that they have a way of just speaking directly to the racial politics, and that's what they're advocating for here. Okay, now in the North is mainly represented at this point in time by a conservative American party called the Whigs. Now, when I say conservative in this regard, I'm not necessarily talking about the same conservatism that I'm talking about in relation to the South. Okay. I'm talking about conservatism in relation to Old English customs. Okay. Think about the United States of America and where it even came from, right? We didn't invent a language, we didn't invent a culture or religious norms or anything like that. We inherited a lot of those things from the British. So in the political advocacy, specifically of the North, you have a group of conservative political ideologues who want to preserve the familiar, to keep things more or less the way they are, while also expanding on these notions of American democracy and sovereignty. Okay, so culturally speaking, they're the conservatives, whereas the Democrats in the South right now are the progressives. Okay, the progressives being they want to lean heavily into slavery, they want to take the US in the direction of slavery. Okay, so we're contrasting the politics of the South with the politics of the North with the early roots of modern American conservatism against the old and antiquated roots of Old English conservatism. Okay, so I hope I'm not confusing you. I hope you're following that. But hear the nuance and hear the distinction. Okay, now this political party, the Whigs, are advocating for like Parliament. Okay, yes, they want tolerance of like Protestant dissenters. They want tolerance of like the idea of free speech and the conventional American freedoms. And while they're leaning into notions of American independence, culturally, they want to preserve the heart of old British customs. Okay. So now with the Whigs, the one issue they're divided on is slavery. Okay. So you have some people who live in the North and identify with the Whig Party. They're culturally conservative in this regard, but they're anti slavery. You also have some other people, same values, but are pro slavery and find themselves being pulled into the politics of the Democrat Party because they're pro slavery. Okay. Now, officially, the Whigs are stating on the record, and as they seek to get elections and representatives and things like that, the political party is officially against slavery. However, all the way up to who they're nominating for the presidency, they are doing a thing where they're constantly running candidates who are themselves slaveholders. Okay. So it just becomes this weird, awkward place or position in which uh, the party is split. Okay. And the party is split on this fundamental issue because for some people in the North, it is a moral atrocity. For other people, they just don't want it to expand. They think it's immoral, but they understand that there are people who are invested in it, and there's an economy built around it, so they don't want to undermine that, but they're not necessarily pro expansion. And then you have how do you satisfy, as one political party, how do you satisfy diametrically opposite political ideologies? You just can't. Okay. So the Whigs are finding themselves between a rock and a hard place, and the space, the breathing room, is getting tighter and tighter. Okay. So um, you have this paranoia among people in the North that, like, if the number of slave states are going to grow, then pro-slavery politics is going to get too much political influence. Okay. And that's going to hurt white workers. Okay. These white workers who want a steady paycheck, or a wage, rather, not a paycheck, because that's a modern thing, but they want a steady wage. They don't want to have their work undermined by the free labor that slavery provides. Okay. So they now have a vested interest in being against slavery because they don't want to lose their livelihood. It doesn't necessarily mean they're against slavery because they want black people to be free. It doesn't necessarily mean they're against slavery because they want racial equality. Some people don't even want slavery. Excuse me, it's not even that some people don't want slavery because they view it to be a moral atrocity. It's almost like you have people who are politically motivated by their own personal interest. Okay. So it's a very complicated dynamic, but that's what's going on. So now the United States has acquired these new territories that it's calling Kansas and Nebraska. Okay. And for Kansas and Nebraska, the idea is you designate a cutoff. You're going to say, we're going to have two states. One of them is going to be a slave state, one of them is going to be a free state, but which is going to be which? Okay. And this is the debate among the politics. This is the debate where you've got to convince people how they're going to vote. Um, the residents of these new areas. Okay, and in the middle of all of this, you have the socioeconomic debate. You have the moral debate. Okay, um, you have the philosophical debate. All of the layers of the debate for and against slavery are increasing the pressure on the Whigs to figure out what their own political identity is even going to be. And it can't figure it out. And essentially, the party just kind of dies, it collapses. So, for the time being, here is where Democrats kind of win. And by Democrats, again, I'm not talking about modern Democrats. I'm talking about the early roots of modern American conservatism Democrats, represented by the large constituency in the South. Okay. So now that the Whigs are dead, they're irrelevant. Essentially, the people have to form a new party. And the party has to center its idea around fighting against the expansion of slavery, not for moral reasons, but so that white working class families can have a stable living in this land we call America, or the land of the free. So what is that political party then? It's going to be the Republican Party. Okay. What would eventually become the party of Lincoln? We're not necessarily in the Lincoln presidency era just yet, but it's founded. This political party is founded in the northern states in 1854, and essentially their core mission is to oppose the expansion of slavery. They're not calling for it to end. They just don't want it to expand, because as America expands, as their families are growing, okay, as their politics are becoming more cemented around their traditional modes of living, they don't want to be jeopardized and undermined by free labor. Okay. So they are pushing for economic and social modernization, fiscal responsibility. This is where you get the term fiscal responsibility as it relates to the Republican Party, right? Um, Being fiscally responsible means making sure that America has a hustling, bustling economy that is not undermined by the institution of slavery. So that's where you get that language from, and that becomes the party's values, their core values. I would even go so far as to say there are probably Republican voters today who would say that is still the party's values today or something to that effect. Now, that's not necessarily true, but this is where they get it from. And the context has changed over time. The original context for all of these core political values was around the context of slavery and regulating the expansion of slavery so it doesn't threaten the stability of white working class people. Okay. So their core values then, okay. Um, Even though, like I said, even though they're still against the expansion of slavery, it doesn't necessarily mean they're pro-black. Most people are still anti-black culturally, psychologically. They don't want to live near black people. They firmly believe that the races should not mix at any time for any reason. Okay. So don't buy into. I want to point out something really quick before I say don't buy into. I want to point out that there's a talking point among Republican voters today that this was the party that ended slavery and that it's like almost like a moral foundation for this political party or something like that, that they're the ones that ended slavery, and for some reason now black people vote Democrat despite the fact that the Democrat was the white supremacist party and they were pro-slavery and blah blah blah. Well, I want to call out the reality is that the only reason the Republican Party was against slavery is because of the economic threat. Okay. They did not want black men to vote. That's Republican voters in the North. Okay. Um, they didn't even really want to live next to black people. They really did want black people to be isolated, maybe kick them out, move them to a different section of the land, let them have their own land and they can govern themselves. Um, but no, we shouldn't be mixing in the schools. We shouldn't be mixing in the neighborhoods. Any modes of transportation, the races shouldn't be mixing. You shouldn't be hiring black people when you could be hiring white working class people. White people uh, work harder than black people. All of these ideas are kind of becoming cemented as like core Republican Party values. So they're not necessarily the pro-black party at this point in time, just because they're against slavery and would eventually end it. Okay, it's motivated by self-interest. Now, having said that, that's also the case for the states in the North, not just the Republican Party. Okay. The states in the North, I know there's this rhetoric in like modern American education that like the North was like morally superior, that like they're the good guys and they want to end slavery because it's wrong and they know that it's wrong. And the people in the South, they're just evil and wicked. And like I said, culturally speaking, we already talked about the origins of scientific racism and its influence on the cultural trajectory of the United States. Okay. Um, that like the cultural norm, the psychosocial norm, all of these things is really just white supremacy. Okay. So the states in the North have things called black laws. And the black laws, even though they're free states, they're trying to limit the number of black people that can live in these states, the freedoms that these black people have, what they're allowed to do, where they're allowed to go, in what concentration, right? Because a lot of these laws are motivated by the scientific precedent and the cultural norms around the idea that racial groups are different, white people are inherently superior, and the races shouldn't mix at all. Okay. So white Americans, I don't even want to say embrace, because embrace almost sounds like it's a conscious decision to choose to embrace something while turning away from the idea of racial equality, when in reality it's just more like that's the status quo. The status quo is other racial groups do not hold the same quality of values, the same virtues as white people. And what makes white people so inherently sovereign, superior, the apex of humanity, is their whiteness itself. And so, no, the states in the North were very much against the idea of like racial intermixing. Okay. So why would they go to war with the South and blah, blah, blah? We'll get there, I promise. Okay. Okay, so what did those black laws look like? Okay, I already said most white Northerners wanted nothing to do with black people, so I'm not going to repeat that, right? Um, But they've already internalized this idea that free black people, because they're not on the plantation, because they don't have a job, they're like inherently lazy. Okay. There's something wrong with these black people. And the thing that's wrong with these black people is they just have no motive. It's almost like they belong enslaved. Okay. So you have this idea in the North. It's like almost, I don't want to call it cognitive dissonance, but it's mutually incompatible ideas that like black people are lazy because they don't work, but you don't hire them, so they can't work, but they belong on the plantation where they work hard, but then you want it in slavery because it's a threat to the economic stability of white families. It's like it's people are holding mutually incompatible values. And those mutually incompatible values is contextualized by the lie they've internalized around racial superiority. Okay. So they have this belief that, like, if a free black person is free, not only are they lazy, but they're incapable of like honest hard work. Okay. Um, and at the same time, they're paranoid that if a black person happens to get a job, that black person is going to basically steal their job. Sound familiar? Right? Okay. Now, why would they be paranoid that a black person would steal their job, even though the norm is that you don't hire black people? Well, right, like modern immigration issues that we've talked about in different contexts, you can pay them less. And even when you pay them less, they're more likely to work hard because it's their only source of income. They need that income to survive. And if they prove their reliability, then they might be a steady source of manual labor, cheap manual labor, that could undercut the cost of paying another white working class person fairly. Okay. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so yes, simultaneously, they have this belief that black people are lazy, they're incapable of honest work. But then at the same time, if they get a job, then they stole your job, but then like they belong on the plantation, but in slavery. Okay, right? Um, Michael of Albany, New York. He says, I am not nor have ever been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. I am not nor have ever been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office. Oh, this is an Abraham Lincoln quote. Nor to intermarry with white people. And I say in addition that there is a physical difference between white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together in terms of social and political equality. I will add to this that I have never seen, to my knowledge, a man, woman, or child who is in favor of producing perfect equality, social and political, between Negroes and white men. Correct. Correct. Okay, so now, thank you, Michael, for this quote. This is fantastic. I think I have this quote somewhere in a slide, somewhere around here. I'm not sure. Um, but Lincoln is he's a product of his environment. Okay. So even Lincoln, right? I'm establishing for you that the North wasn't this morally superior industrial body that inhabited or encompassed all of the American values of freedom and justice. That wasn't the case at all. Everybody is firmly invested in this idea that like it is morally abhorrent. It's atrocious to have anything to do with Negroes, to help Negroes, to work by Negroes, to live with them, to rely on them, or anything like that. Okay. So they believe that like there's a racial affliction with blackness that like to be in contact with black people is like to be in contact with people who are inherently like diseased. And that if black people somehow made contact with the North, that it would like corrupt the North. So they want to figure out a way. You have black people that are trying to flee into the North because these are free states, but these black people are trying to flee into the North because they want their freedom. So now these states, the northern states, are trying to adopt laws to like regulate and restrict Negro immigration. Does that sound familiar? Haven't we heard this before? Where did we hear this and why does it sound so familiar? Right. We were talking about this. We talk about this in the modern era when it comes to ICE, when it comes to Mexico, when it comes to black people. We're the first. Yes, same as it ever was. Correct, Jen. Same as it ever was. You might say same shit, different day, different era, different century, but it's the same shit all over again. Nothing is new under the sun. Okay? So at some point, yes, now you have Negroes that are immigrants because they're fleeing, so they're crossing state borders undocumented and illegal because they want freedom, right? And then in so doing, you have white people in the North who do believe themselves to be morally superior, but want nothing to do with the niggers that are coming in and invading their territories. And if anything, they want to figure out a way to keep them out. Okay. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, we'll get to Dred Scott. Okay. Um, okay, so here, okay, with the black laws go on for decades, right? All the way from the early 1800s to like 1850. Okay. But like Ohio, for example, this is not, it wasn't only Ohio, but because Ohio is a northern state, you have Ohio black laws that require black people to provide legal evidence that they're free. Okay. So that there's evidence that like they're not just like stealing away from slavery, but that they have, what would you call it? Documentation, right? They have to have documentation. And then with that documentation, they have to register with a county clerk. So you have to go through, what is it called? Immigration and Customs Enforcement, right? Sound familiar? Okay. And then in addition to proving that they're free, yeah, let me see your papers. That's it. Okay. In addition to, let me see your papers, register with a county clerk, make sure you're here legally. You also then have to be able to afford a $500 bond to pay for, like, it's like an insurance in a way, but like pay for your case in case a bounty hunter or a sheriff or something like that comes into the state and tries to take you away back to a plantation. Because what's been happening during this time is some plantation owners are doing a thing, kind of like Solomon Northup, like we talked about last week, is they're going into the North and claiming that some black people belong to them when they really don't, and then are kidnapping those black people and taking them back and putting them on the plantation. Okay, so do you think? And remember, during this time, $500 is not the same $500 that we're talking about in 2026. Can somebody do the math on this? For example, let's pretend it's 1854 or no, 1849, excuse me. Um, can somebody go on the internet, get a conversion calculator and calculate $500 and then whatever that means for 1849 in today's thing, accounting for inflation? What number is that? I'm really curious. Okay. It's got to be up there. What the hell is that? What is that, like $50,000? I don't even know. I'm so curious. When you get the answer, post it in the chat. Okay. Um, so you have to do all of that in order to then be here legally. 28K. There you go. Thank you, Joshua. There you go. Do you think anybody, think about it in modern terms. Let's say we're talking about a Mexican, a Venezuelan, a Colombian, whoever. Okay. They come to the US and we say, you've got to prove that your country of origin let you go freely, which how are, in certain cases you're not going to be able to prove that. Like think about it logistically for a black person who was always free and just decided to relocate. Do you have any documented evidence that you're free? Right? Okay. Then you have to register with a county clerk and you got to pay 28K. Can you do it? Nobody can. And that's the point. The point is they're aware that like if you erect this legal barrier, then technically it is a legal barrier that other individuals are obligated to follow. But in following it, no one's going to actually be able to meet that criteria. So then legally, you have the ability to kick black people out and essentially kick out any black people, including the free black people. Okay. Yes. Washing their hands of the poor unwashed. In certain cases, oh, wait, hold on. Even if they treat it like it's a bond, it's still 28K. Yeah. Who's going to have that? Right. And you're talking about 28K in pre-Civil War America. You would essentially have to have the economic standing of a slave plantation owner as a black person. But the point is the ridiculousness of this law, they know it's ridiculous. That's the entire point, right? It's a legal loophole that makes it impossible for black people to legally immigrate to a so-called free state. Do you see the irony or the contradiction, right? Okay. And some of these laws, I just pointed out Ohio's ridiculous law, but in Illinois, for example, they're going as far as, man, we're just gonna like repeatedly whip black people until they leave. Just whip them across state lines. And in some cases, really did try to beat black people out of the state, like beat them up, burn down their homes, attack them, harm them, maim them. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Until they leave. So at no point was the North like this morally superior body. Nobody wanted black people around. This wasn't about, I mean, it's about black people, but being against slavery is not about being pro-black at any point in time and for any reason. Okay. So now what you have here is essentially uh, legal institutions, governmental bodies, state representatives doing what they can to prevent black people from having the same footing, especially free black people, from having the same footing as white people, especially white people in the North. And they would do a thing called disenfranchisement. I think I used this word before. Um, I don't know why you wouldn't know the meaning of this word, but if you don't know the meaning of this word, disenfranchisement means essentially trying to systematically exclude black people from participating in US democracy. So I already mentioned this notion of universal white manhood suffrage. And that's where we get this core concept is it's about the fact that you do have free black people who are technically and legally allowed to be in the state, but you don't want them to have the same footing socially, legally as white people. Okay. So I think New England is the exception in this case. New England was one of the rare cases in pre-Civil War U.S. history where black people actually were allowed to vote. And I could be wrong here. I'm welcome to be corrected if somebody wants to fact check me here. But I think New England was the only region to protect the black vote. Am I remembering that correctly? I don't know. Somebody can fact check me on that. Um, okay, but outside of New England, essentially allowing black men to be able to participate in American democracy, and I'm talking about free black men, everywhere else, black disenfranchisement was the status quo. And by disenfranchisement, we're not just talking about, intimidating black people from showing up to the polls and trying to prevent them from voting, but like legally, like trying to pass laws that specifically discriminate against black people. Okay. And that is in part being motivated by what is already the status quo, too, is white people's apathy for even black representation, the needs of black people, their voices, their suffrage. They don't care. Nobody cares about that. Okay. So to be a free black person at this point in time is essentially just nobody gives a fuck about you. And yeah, you would think in one sense that like you're free. You're free. Isn't that great? Isn't that a joy? Like you're not enslaved. You don't get beaten or raped. Well, not necessarily. Just because you're not working on a plantation doesn't mean you can't be beaten on the street or raped by somebody. But nobody cares about your suffrage. Nobody cares about your needs. Nobody cares about your wants. Nobody even wants you here. Okay. So is being free as a black person in America really all that much better than being enslaved? Yes, technically, but not really by much. Okay. So then you have a unique circumstance where uh, in Ohio, in Illinois, as well as other northern states that you can see on this list here that my head isn't blocking, um, they are passing laws that make it illegal for black people to vote. That a black person cannot even enter into a polling place, much less get their hands on a ballot. Okay. Um, so where at the start, because I had already told you, free black people had already existed at the point that white people even set foot on this land. You did have black male suffrage, but it's so rare, it's so minimal, and white people are so invested in keeping niggers out of their polling booths that it really just doesn't have a footing here. Okay. Okay, so in certain cases, you have like the dominant elite that is trying to say that if we're going to go along these notions of like universal, like white male suffrage or like American suffrage or something like that, you need property qualifications. And even if those property qualifications means that poor whites can't vote, then so be it, right? So you do have some dominant elite constituents that are perfectly fine with cutting white people out of American democracy entirely, certain white people out of American democracy, if it means that black people don't get to be involved. Okay, so certain poor white people are just as expendable. Okay. Friendly reminder to the people who might be listening in the Instagram Live. The Instagram Live is going to cut out at approximately 4:59. You have a few minutes. If you want to jump into the slides, click the link in my bio. Otherwise, Instagram has a time limit where it puts a 1 hour time limit on things and then it cuts off. And I don't come back after it does. So just make sure you're aware of that. All right. Okay. Now, having said that, this is what it looks like. Okay. And so then obviously black people are poorer than whites, especially free black people, because they don't really get work. They try to find work here and there, but it's indecent to hire these black people, right? It means then that you're mainly giving white people the right to vote while denying black people the same right, even though they're American, even though they're free, and even if it means you're denying white people an opportunity to participate in American democracy too. Okay. So you have white people at odds now. There's a group of white people who don't care that poor white people can't vote. There's a group of white people saying, "Hey, no, fuck that. I want to be able to vote, but I don't want niggers voting in the polling booth." Okay. But you can't cut me out. I'm American too. I get a voice. I have a say. And every which way in between. So it's like there's conflicts everywhere. Okay. And this is where you get those so-called egalitarian political movements, right? The egalitarian political movement, I would say, is a term that is calibrated to whiteness, meaning white suffrage in relation to egalitarianism. Okay. Um, but they're pushing for the removal of property qualifications because they don't think it's fair that they're American and they don't get a say because they don't own a piece of land, right? Which, to be fair, is not necessarily fair to them, but in order for that to be fair to them, then the same grace would need to be extended to Black people, and they don't want to do that. Okay, so with disenfranchisement, okay, um, if you remove property qualifications, then that means that you're going to get black suffrage. Okay. So now you have a phenomenon where you're trying to like figure out the legal loophole for like keeping black people out of democracy while also maximizing the number of white people who can participate, but trying to find the language, the neutral language that facilitates this outcome. Okay. Okay. So basically everybody opposes black male suffrage. Nobody wants free black people to vote at all. Okay. So, what were the arguments? What were the debates around this topic? I'm going to finish off this slide. Technically, I like to wrap up neatly within an hour, but I have about 13 more slides. I'm going to try to make my points concise and clear. Give me about an additional 15 minutes or so before we jump into Q&A. Okay. Um, but what were the arguments? What did those arguments look like? Okay, they're arguing that if black men can participate in American democracy, then that means that they can run for office. And do you want niggers running for office? Do you want to be led by a nigger? Do you want a nigger dictating the rules of your life and your society and the expansion of new America? Well, no, right? Because essentially they're going to corrupt the democratic process. And I would liken it to, do you remember all of the people, all of the criticisms that were thrown at Barack Obama, let's say in like 2007, right? There were people who were genuinely afraid that like if Barack Obama was elected, he's going to try to like get racial retribution, right? He's gonna try to pass black reparations. He's gonna try to create an institution of white enslavement and blah 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 and on, right? Okay, well, the same things are being said here. Oh, well, you don't want to elect a nigger into office because niggers don't have the intellectual capacity to run America. That's what they're saying. Okay. In addition to that, they're also saying then that if you elect a nigger into office, they're going to mix with white people. Do you want that? Do you want the races mixing? Because the niggers do. Oh, well, if you elect a nigger into office, then he's going to respond with political violence. He's going to try to get racial retribution. There are reasons why you don't want black people to hold office here. Elena says this reminds me of the attitudes of constant bullying that never ends. Absolutely. Like I said, nothing is new under the sun here. Okay. Everything that you're witnessing in the present is a repeat of something that has already happened in the past. Okay. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that you're hearing. Okay, well, because there's this paranoia around black people participating in American democracy, poor white people, elite white people, all essentially band together around this idea of universal white male suffrage. Okay, fine. Universal white male suffrage it is. We're going to do this. We're going to remove class privilege as a requirement for you to participate, and we'll try to do a thing where essentially we're just going to say no Negroes. Jen Cox. The irony of not wanting races to mix when slaveholders have qualms about raping. It's like correct, while also then trying to espouse the idea of like um uh, uh, uh assimilating to American culture. What the fuck is American culture? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So essentially, all throughout the 1800s, and specifically for free black people, okay, you have black men that essentially are just prohibited from participating in democracy, specifically because they're black. And this legal footing, political footing, becomes a legal footing, becomes a cultural footing. Okay. Friendly reminder, last warning to the people in the IG Live. The IG live stream is going to cut off in a few seconds. Jump over, click the link in my bio. You can see the slides. You'll be able to participate in Q&A. It's free to access. Okay. But this is where you get the culture norm of segregation in America, including in the North. It wasn't necessarily in the South. We do this thing in American society where we absolutely shit and trash on the South while propping up the North as if it was a bastion of moral superiority. And it absolutely wasn't. In fact, the North was probably the leading pioneer for like the culture norms around like explicit racial segregation across America. Okay. That now you have white people that are like, yeah, you know what? Let's be a little bit more racially explicit here, and just say whites only. No niggers. And while we're at it, no niggers, no Mexicans, no Irish, no dogs, no blah, blah, blah. Just start discriminating against the people you don't like. Yeah, the best way to go about regulating political power is to just start being racially explicit, right? So this is where you get like hotels, resorts, taverns, lecture halls, libraries, art exhibits, churches, everything. They just start throwing up whites only signs. Whites only. Okay. And in certain circumstances, right, you have certain municipalities, certain businesses or storefronts where it's not really practical to discriminate against Black people. So, what you do in those cases is you just designate a coloreds only section. So, the image that you're seeing above me, in my head here, um, I don't think this is from the 1800s, the pre-Civil War period, only because the camera was not invented during this time. So, and also the sign here to my right, technically, the way you're seeing it, that's also from like the 1960s. But I put these images here because I want you to be able to kind of get a sense of the where these ideas come from is that this is where you get colored entrances, colored sections, whites only sections. We only tend to white people. We want white people at our white communities, right? It just becomes a thing where now this just gets wrapped up in the culture norms of what we're calling American society. Okay. So when it comes to like public transportation, for example, okay, like a train, okay, everybody's got to be able to travel across long distances over a short period in time, and the train is the best and most efficient way to do so. Okay. Also, because these train operating businesses want to be able to make money, it means then that they have to provide service to Negroes as well as to white people. So you have a thing where on these trains they designate specific cars for niggers. Okay, I'm using that word specifically. It's for the niggers. And the reason why I'm using that word is because, in addition to the word nigger, another way to refer to a Black person was Jim Crow. Okay, Jim Crow, excuse me, in the image that you see up above here, Jim Crow was a blackface caricature who was dim-witted, stupid, klutzy, happy-go-lucky, and lots of America had essentially internalized that what it meant to be black was to be this kind of nigger. Okay? So another derogatory term that you could use to refer to black people other than nigger was to call them Jim Crow, and this is where you get the Jim Crow cars. Not Jim Crow laws just yet. Okay. Jim Crow laws then becomes a thing where Jim Crow laws, you could replace the word Jim Crow for nigger. Okay. But Jim Crow cars was where it first started. So anytime a black person wanted to buy a ticket to a train, they would buy a colored ticket and then they would approach the Jim Crow section to get on the Jim Crow car. Okay. And so then this is where you have that precedent of black people, even the elite black people, whether they're free or not, are all essentially uh, uh, they're all essentially forced to endure the same kind of like racial segregation. Okay. Again, a picture that above, I don't know if somebody wants to image search, you can kind of look for it. It would probably take some digging. I don't think this is, I think this is from like the 1940s, I want to say again. And then this image over here is from the desegregation era, the Brown versus Board of Education era. Again, not necessarily images from this picture or from this context and time, but certainly, I'm trying to evoke or force you to make the connections of where these ideas around the normativity of racial segregation even comes from, right? Okay. So at this point in time, even when you're black and you're free, you still have to go out into the public. You still have to introduce yourself to society. And so when you're there, even if you're in the colored section or you're walking to the colored section or something like that, black people are frequently facing attacks, insults, in public, right? It's not just suddenly, you're black, you go this way, I'm white, I go this way. But like you could just be existing autonomously, and then some people are like, nigger, fuck you, nigger, get out of here, blah, 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 go spit on your shoes, spit on your clothes, tip off your hat, maybe slap you on the back of the head, push you around a little. And it's normal. It's normal to see those things. Okay. So you have black people who are learning that, like, don't you never, never trust a white person under any circumstance for any reason. Elena says, "Oh my God, they meant Jim Crow laws, as in this word." Yes, yes. So Jim Crow, at least in the modern context, doesn't carry the same context as the word nigger does. Okay, um, and I would say thankfully so, because you can still accurately describe what was going on without necessarily being punished for using this word. But having said that, in its appropriate context, an alternative word for nigger was Jim Crow. Okay. So yes, that's absolutely true. Okay. So within this segregation, then, even where you have black people that have to interact with whites on some equal footing, maybe they need service, maybe they're looking to purchase a ticket somewhere, maybe whatever white person they're engaging with, they're dependent on for some fundamental outcome, there's always a layer of like racial tension behind it. Okay. And this is how fundamentally embedded racism is in the North in American society. Okay. It's so embedded in American society that, like, how, regardless of the city that you live in, there's a little China, right? Or Chinatown or something like that. There's a little Ethiopia, right? There are these little ethnic, I don't want to call them enclaves, but like little pockets of ethnic communities that kind of concentrate in certain areas. Okay. Um, Back then, you would get these segregated black neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods were officially called things like Nigger Hill in Boston. Okay. So you're a resident of Nigger Hill. In Cincinnati, they had a place called Little Africa. And then in Pittsburgh, for example, and Pittsburgh is actually a fairly small city. Um, but in Pittsburgh, instead of calling it Haiti, they would call it Haiti, right? This is where actually the American pronunciation of Haiti comes from, is Haiti. That gets kind of caught up in the lexicon, kind of synonymous with the word hate in a way. It's a kind of negative connotation, right? But that's how fundamentally embedded it is. Okay. And so then you're living in these segregated cities. And you can imagine, if you're in this urban community, this urbanized or urbanized environment as a free black person, that doesn't necessarily mean you're living pretty. Okay. You're still living in a segregated society. Your quality of living is destitute, and it's mainly destitute because it's incredibly hard to find work. It's really difficult to find work. More importantly, you're not in a rural society, so it's not really easy to be able to like grow your own food. So how do you think black people are surviving, right? They're stealing, breaking laws, and then in the North, in the free society in the North, these black people, that then gets taken up as like a racial stereotype, that like, oh, they're no good, they're dishonest, they steal, they lie, they're lazy, they don't work hard, they blah blah blah. It's like all of the social conditions that force them into this outcome becomes the things that they are then racially persecuted for through like the form of like racial stereotypes. When we say North, we mean Midwest and New England too. Yes. Elena, the word North is kind of geographically arbitrary. We don't necessarily mean like polar north, but rather the northern regions relative to the country itself. Yes. So that can include the Midwest, the Union. Yes. The Midwest, which technically is mostly the eastern side of the United States, it's all arbitrary terminology. Yeah. Um, but in that, it is also specific too. Okay. So you have this common sentiment, not many, But you have lots of Southerners who are aware of how Black people are treated in the North, and they're like, man, you're better off enslaved, right? Because I mean, at least if you're enslaved, you don't have to deal with the persecution, getting beaten up, getting spat on, you're starving, you're poor, you can't figure out how to like survive. At least if you're a slave, there's a kind of order to the system that you're surviving, right? So you have lots of Southerners that not only in addition to going into the North and trying to kidnap Black people from the North, but also have this idea of like, why don't you just come back to the South? Because at least there's a place for you here. They don't want you in the North because there's no place for you. But despite that, do any Black people just want to voluntarily go back into enslavement? Absolutely not. I'll be honest with you. Even if my life is the absolute worst and most shitty, I'd rather have my freedom and my autonomy than to not. And I think that that's a hallmark of human nature. I don't know of anyone who would disagree with me on that, right? Okay. So what were the Black family dynamics? We're almost done here. I promise. Give me a few more minutes. Um, what were the Black family dynamics here? Okay. Well, for the family, like I want to call it a nuclear family, but what the hell is a nuclear family for Black people in this regard? Essentially, like a traditional Black family in this pre-Civil War context is going to be like Black people who you have two parent households, right? You have a matriarch, you have a patriarch, you might have many children, not just one or two, okay? But many children. But specifically in the industrial North, where things are a little more economically volatile for Black people, um, single parent households are common, right? The single parent household being the household where, you know, essentially one parent is just out and away, and they can't they don't really come back, they don't live there. It's not really easy to rely on them. And when I say it's not easy to rely on them, I'm not talking about in the sort of conventional racialized sense that you've come to learn of the unreliance of Black fathers, like some conservative leaning people like to kind of bastardize, but rather that the single parent dynamic is mainly being driven by the fact that like Black men, for example, who are expected to be the providers in this context, they can't find employment. It's hard for them to get a job because it's indecent to hire niggers. Why would you hire a nigger when you could hire a white person at your establishment? And the trade-off is you have to pay a white person a fair living wage that a Black person wouldn't be able, that you could pay a Black person cheaper, but then you probably lose business. I don't know, that came out a little odd. Okay. I show this graph here because I think it's important. And take it with a grain of salt because this is back in 2003, but we're talking about history right now, so you can kind of blur the lines in relation to time. Um, this is the likelihood, a graph that quantifies the likelihood to get a callback for Black and white applicants who both do and do not have criminal records. And what you notice is that for Blacks and whites who have criminal records, okay, white people are 17% more likely, or rather, let's say 12% more likely to get a callback than Black people with a criminal record, okay? With no criminal record, white people are 20% more likely than Black people to get a callback, okay? Now, the reason why I put this here, I think it's just a textbook example of the cultural precedent that leads to the consistent outcomes that we see in demographic or quantifiable patterns is historically informed. And when I say historically informed, often what comes with that language is this arbitrary idea of like digging back in the past to things we can't really quite pinpoint. And I'm telling you, you can pinpoint it all the way back to before the Civil War, that it is indecent to hire niggers. You would prefer not to hire niggers. And even if you're a white person, demonstrates throughout the timeline of their life a lack of reliability, untrustworthiness, that you're still going to favor their survival and their economic stability over that of a nigger. And in 2003, I want to point out to you that a white person is 17% likely to get a callback with a criminal record, that a black person with no criminal record will only get 14%. You see that? So the function here is race. Okay, the function is that race is the operating factor here. So now, in terms of family politics, where we're talking about, well, why is the dad gone? And oh, he's unreliable, and we can't rely on him, but we're struggling, and blah blah blah. And then here's Charlie Kirk a few years ago talking about the downfall of the black family, and black fathers are unreliable, and we waste our money on black, 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 and da da da, da, and you guys are lazy, and all of that is coming from social and economic conditions that are forcing those outcomes. And then, in addition to that, the cultural reinforcement of racial superiority and the norms around them. Okay. Okay. So you basically create a circumstance in which Black people want to be free and they will hold on to that freedom for dear life. But even when they have it, life is hard. Okay. Literally still this way in the marketplace. Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, if you went to Google Scholar right now, I'm sure you could probably find an updated version of this graph using the same language, Google Scholar, and then look up criminal record, interview callbacks, race. And I'm pretty sure you'll find modern examples of this. Um, that's how it is. Okay. So this means then that Black people are just systematically unable to earn a living. And of course, it's not impossible. There's always exceptions. There's always going to be exceptions, right? Where you'll have Black people who do get jobs, white people who are willing to pay under the table a lower wage to a Black person who they do feel is reliable. Don't think of any of these things that I'm talking about as being absolute, but by and large, that is the pattern that's being driven. Okay. So this is a circumstance in which for free Black people living in the industrialized and urban North pre-Civil War means mortality is fucking high, my dude. It's high. And especially if you're Black and male, it's high because of lynching. It's high because of starvation or a lack of adequate nutrition. It's high because you're being preyed upon by society. Okay. There's no one to protect you. There's no laws to protect you. There are no mechanisms for protection. You're basically at the mercy of the cosmos in an environment where all of the elements are stacked against you, even if you're free. So, what does this mean then? We talked about this concept of fictive kinships here. Okay. Where for the fictive kinships, okay, this means that many Black families that live in concentration in the urban industrialized North are forced to rely on each other for survival, which then means that in the absence of a father or two fathers or something like that, you might rely on your auntie so and so, your auntie Ella May or your auntie Rose or something like that, right? And they're not blood related, but they fill in and abide by the obligations that that role entails because it means that it confers the survival of the group. So the fictive kinship relationships that Black people would bring from West Africa in the context of slavery then has a leg to stand on for survival in the urban and industrializing North during this time period. Okay. Two more slides or three more slides. I promise we're almost done. Elena, a crazy question, but it all makes me wonder about how then they would go about segregating social media. There was no such thing as social media. I think it was more like socializing. Um, I think in socializing, Right? Oh, you mean now? It makes me wonder about how then they would go about segregate. Oh, I see what you mean. Like the algorithms segregating. Yeah, well, yeah, algorithms are doing lots of things. The algorithms are segregating the right versus the left, right? Christians versus atheists, the Trumpers versus the non-Trump. They're already doing all of that. Yeah, thank you, Josh. Um, okay, a few more slides. I promise I'm almost done because I do want to get to the Q&A. I promise I'm not trying to eat up your time. I don't want to split this lecture into two. Okay, so I've already established for you that you have Black people that are struggling to gain some kind of meaningful employment in the same ways that white families are struggling, right? So here you have essentially there's a norm, right? If you're going to have immigrants and you have immigrants from Europe, that you're going to prioritize employing those European immigrants before you even begin employing Black people. Okay. Um, and so this essentially means then that to be Black means that you're trying to compete against European immigrants in a racial society where like no one really wants to hire you because it's indecent. Okay. But where they did receive jobs, they were paid lower wages than their white immigrants by comparison. And because they're dependent on that for survival, that means then that these Black people are like working extra hard overtime for like half the pay. This is where you get that idea of like working twice as hard for half as much, right? That's a modern saying that also has roots in the antebellum America, right? Um, two more slides. Or yeah, two more slides. Okay, so here we are. Um, Many Black men who had their freedom then would become sailors, right? They would go and work on a boat. And many fishermen would hire Black people because, first of all, it's a high risk job. There's lots of injury, okay? But it also means then that you can pay these Black men really cheap, okay, for their labor. But those Black men also then find safety outside of the industrialized North, that they still get their work. They're not necessarily being harassed. The white sailors that hired them are dependent on them for survival. So there's a kind of mutualism there. This means then that Black men kind of find an operative niche in becoming sailors. Okay. But in finding that niche, the moment they get off of the boat and they go home and they try to bring back money to their family or something like that, it's already high risk again. Okay. Do you get it? So it's a thing where like Black men have to survive in a society that doesn't want them. And the way that they survive is by temporarily exiting that society, which means then that they can't be present for their families. Right. Now, despite this, okay, you still do end up with a select, a minor group of Black people who would become economically elite for Blackness, okay? Not economically elite necessarily in comparison to whiteness, but if a Black person had a unique kind of talent, if they had some kind of business or family connection, sometimes it's as easy as they're lighter skinned. Maybe they have a college education. If they have a way to be able to leverage some unique skill that could benefit the North in some selective way that no one else can contribute, that Black person then could position themselves as an elite. Okay. In terms of talent, then we're talking about like education. Duke Ellington is not relevant until no, Elena. Duke Ellington is not relevant until the 1920s ish. Okay. So right now we're still talking about pre-Civil War. We're talking about 1850s, right? So he's not alive during this time. But like Duke Ellington, just in the context of a slavery industrialized America, it's Black people who are entertaining to the white masses in a unique way that they are able to distinguish themselves. And again, it's a rarity, but it's still going to exist as a niche, right? Okay. You also then in these Black communities, because Black people they can't go to a white hospital, right, or a medical firm, if you will. They don't get access to white lawyers. They can't enter white churches or anything like that. Um, you do have black people that then position themselves. They become physicians and then they treat other black people so they find an economic niche, right? You have black people who are willing to study the law and learn the law and then become lawyers and try to provide legal representation for other black people. You have black people that are spiritual leaders, okay, general laborers with specialized skills, usually skills that they inherited from their skilled enslaved ancestors, right? And so these people are then able to build businesses or economic gain around their unique skills. So even in the industrialized North, where it's extremely hostile and harsh for most free Black people, you still will end up with a select and small group of Black people who have the ability to position themselves as elite in comparison to the vast majority of free Black people, even in the North, right? So this creates a phenomenon in which all Black people, and by all Black people, I mean the people who have the means to do so, are essentially forced to create their own economic opportunities. Okay. And in creating their own economic opportunities, that's the only way that they're able to submit success for themselves. This is why rugged individualism then becomes an operative norm for Black Americans, similarly to white Americans, where like people in Asia, people in Mexico don't necessarily survive through those modes of living and social organization. This is where a rugged individualism becomes an operative norm. And I would say it's not a healthy one, but it's a one that, at least in its proper historical context, conferred survival for these free Black people. Okay. So that's where we are. That's where I'll end it. Sorry for going a little over in terms of the Q&A here. But here we are. I want to give you the opportunity to maybe ask a question or two, or not necessarily trying to limit you, but if there's a question that you want to ask, now's your time. Does anyone have any? I don't even know. Usually it takes a few seconds before somebody chimes in. Oh, is the wow, the Instagram was still going. Interesting. Okay. Well, yeah. Um, it feels like nothing's changed in a way. Yes, I think that is the point of learning things like this. When I tell you, when I tell you things like this, it makes it harder to believe that like things have changed. And they have. They absolutely have, right? But at the same time, not by much.
So yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes, Josh.
Man, what up, though? So it's yeah, it's sort of it's like shock therapy almost for Black Americans as we delve into like this topic academically because we just like are getting an expounded version of our lived experience in a way. I'm like, oh
Mhm.
my God, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And we like when we be telling people like, yeah, it's still the same, bro. And they're like, no, it's not. And I'm like, I promise you.
It very much is. And it almost sounds like an
Yeah.
irrational complaint. Like when an uninitiated person hears you say, no, nothing has changed, it's like, oh, get rid of the pessimism. Come on, slavery's over, racism is over, and blah blah blah. But it's like the moment you start digging into the details, it's like nothing's changed.
Yeah, I mean, they see the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and they go nuts. And they're like, listen, we're all the same. You're just lazy. Get over it. But it's
Yeah.
it's all right. It's
Yeah.
and it's crazy too because the more and more I meet people from other countries, the more and more and like I tell them about this stuff as a Black American, they're like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" I'm like, "No, nigga, we're not okay. None of us are okay."
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying
Yeah.
to.
None of it. But but society doesn't
Man.
listen to black people until they absolutely have to.
And
So
then they almost kind of still don't, like you said,
yeah.
till they have to. Unfortunately, is really just under the muzzle, and we learned that from every revolutionary there ever was, and that's an
Mhm.
unfortunate truth of humanity,
Mhm.
not an American truth.
Yeah, from the immigration crisis to economic standing and well-being, incarceration, it's same shit, different day. And nothing is new under the sun. I always say that. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Solomon had it right. He was eating when he wrote Ecclesiastes, bro. He was eating for sure.
Mhm. All
Oh
right.
man, always a pleasure, bro. For real,
Yeah.
always good to chop it up with you, bro.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Jen. Thank you for turning on your camera. Oh, you have no. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for being present with your face, so I don't feel so alone in this mosaic here.
Well, I guess I'll have a question also,
Yeah, yeah,
man, for
sure,
you,
sure.
so I don't be a selfish person and just talk. Are you gonna do like a chronological thing? Are you like going forward now, like we in Antebellum? Are you about to go through like Civil War, then Reconstruction, etc.? Is that what's
Yes,
going on?
yes. This is
What's
this
up?
is all chronological. So we're using an old textbook from my undergraduate era that is no longer in print, so I can't get a cease and desist from anyone. But if you join my Patreon, you're not obligated to pay. It's free access for everybody. Um, I provide scans of the chapters as well as my lecture slides and talking points. And then on my YouTube page, basically, if you want to go back to the beginning of where we started, all of the chapters are in sequence. So we go all the way back to pre-colonized Africa, and then work our way through the start of the transatlantic slave trade all the way to colonization. And we're just now hitting, like I said, pre-Civil War. And I forget what chapter is after this, but I think we're creeping up on the Civil War. So, yeah.
Cool. I'm hopping on kind of late, but it's you
Okay.
get in where you fit in. So yeah,
Yeah,
cool,
get
man.
get in where
Sounds
you
like
fit
that's
in.
next one.
Get in where you fit in, and if you're interested to play catch up in any meaningful way, subscribe to my YouTube channel and then just kind of watch passively as you want. All right. Elena says, how are black people so nice to immigrants though? Don't mean to make a sweeping statement, but it feels like there's less resentment, although there absolutely could be. I think part of the reason is because of the shared experience, the collective experience that Black people have in America. I can't make sweeping statements for Black people because not all Black people feel the same way. But in general, I could articulate a shared experience when it comes to racialized marginalization, and because Black people often find themselves in the company of other people of color, growing up with them, sharing meals with them, forming families with them, it just becomes a thing where Black people are just naturally more open to inter-community relations, and that goes the same for white people too. It's not necessarily that there's some wall of separation for white people. It just generally is the case that black people are open to anyone that's open to them, um, because that's the situation that we've been forced in America, and so it just becomes the status quo.
Bro, I'm so glad you just said that.
Yeah,
That's literally just because that's who we are. If
yeah,
we are open to people who are open to us, I try to tell people the different example. Like, bro, I've seen it 100 times. If you bring like one white boy to a party full of brothers, if he's cool and down, that motherfucker will be a celebrity. That
yeah,
nigga's gonna be the most. Brian is gonna be hood famous forever. I promise.
yeah, yeah,
If the other way
absolutely.
around, eh.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's how am I welcome here? Is somebody gonna come and start trying to like do some stuff to me? Is it gonna be like, yeah, black people have to be on high alert for that. But the moment I've even seen a thing where like especially in college, where like I'll have a white friend who had like never been around black people his entire life, was scared shitless to be the minority in a space, and then immediately broke down all of those walls within the span of like 20 minutes after realizing that like nobody is racializing him at all. And then it just becomes a thing where it's like an eye-opening experience for that person. And the reality is that's just, I don't want to say part of it is human nature, right? You could go to Africa, you could go to Asia, and you will find people whose doors are naturally open because that's a fundamental part of human nature. But I think in the context of the American experience, Black people are forced to be welcoming in this way because it confers survival, right? Um, so yeah. Justin John says racism fundamentally needs to be taught in school so that people today have a broader. I agree. I agree. And when you say racism needs to be taught in schools, I'm not talking about the bigotry and prejudice. I'm talking about racial awareness. I'm talking about knowing who's black, knowing who's white, who's Asian, who's Latino, knowing who's Muslim, knowing who's different from you, and then realizing and understanding that despite those minute differences, we're actually all human and we can still break bread together. right? We can still sit at the table together. We can still share meals together, play board games together, enjoy each other's company, marry each other, and live in harmony. And then understand how racism is contextualized in American history and how we need to be intentional about moving away from that, right? And so that's something that I will be teaching to my kids. My oldest daughter is 5, and I have an unborn daughter who's due on the 20th. But I will be teaching these lessons to my kids, right? Because I think it's really important, you know. Um, Elena says, I actually always feel perplexed when I think about visiting the South, since a lot of white people say it's about hospitality, but I essentially never visit because I don't know who's hospitable and to whom. Yeah, I don't want to say it's a gamble, but I will say you do have to be careful in certain areas of the South, but there are pockets of the South that are absolutely hospitable. Yes, both things can be true at the same time. Now, having said that, um, I lived in Brooklyn, New York for a few years, moved back to LA, where I'm originally from, and I had to drive my entire livelihood across the US. And when I did so, we went down southward, through Tennessee, through Arkansas, across Texas. And I did that drive in 2.5 days because I didn't know which areas were good and which areas weren't. I didn't know how up to date the green books were. I didn't want to do my research. And because I have my livelihood in a U-Haul truck with a tiny little padlock, um, I just booked it across the United States because I didn't want to find myself in anywhere where I could disappear and then someone would mysteriously find that I would have committed suicide by hanging myself from a tree with 50 warning shots to the back, you know? So that's a thing in America. And
Oh
yeah,
my
I
God.
don't know what to say. Yeah.
You just mentioned a tree, and I actually wanted to say something about it
Mm,
because before your lectures, I think I wouldn't maybe even know or think about it. And
mm,
recently I was just walking around, like, Virginia. And it was this very nice communal area. Like, I mean, it was very, like, kind of hip and a lot of small houses, people hanging out.
yeah.
Kind of annoying, though. I don't know how to explain in a way. And anyhow, we were walking past this suburban part of it, and there was a huge tree. And I realized that I can't even look at it anymore. It's like at first it
Mm,
was like, oh, a tree, and then it was like, oh no, a tree. It's not a question, sorry, but it's actually crazy.
I see. Like you're making the connection with, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's Virginia, like, I don't
Hmm.
know,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, that's it.
Yeah. Um, and it can be hit or miss, and it's scary because you still hear stories today of black people going missing, and then they're discovered somewhere hanging from a tree. And even in our modernized society, where you have information travels faster than light, so to speak, uh, you still have black people that find themselves in these circumstances, and we like to think that it's a thing of the past, and it just isn't, unfortunately.
It's just also so evil to, sorry, Jen, just 1 second. It's just also so evil to, in a way, like spiritually, if you think about it,
Mhm,
spiritually,
mhm,
to make a tree that's old, that's been here, maybe even, maybe not necessarily, but maybe, because it seemed, very old and sturdy.
mhm,
Maybe even
mhm,
before, like, Europeans came and they kind of make the trees complicit in a way, and trees never wanted to do that. I don't mean to sound unhinged. I mean, not that
No,
I
that
judge
that's
spiritual people,
deeply
but
philosophical. Keep going.
yeah, and I mean, it's especially, no, it's evil to kill people, and it's
Mhm,
evil to kill people because of hatred, but it's also there is some sort of like this even deeper evilness in making, the nature complicit to this,
yeah,
that you look at nature and you think of what, you can't even like appreciate the beauty as a human being.
yeah.
Not me, but just, because you know that something so pure like nature is now
Mm,
mixed into this just like deep evil. That's it.
yeah, that's really deep. I never thought about that way. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, Jen,
So you mentioned green books, and maybe I'm naive, but are green books still a thing?
they are. Um, the green books, I know there are modernized versions of it. Um, when I was moving out of Brooklyn, it was in the middle of COVID. So things were all over. I really wasn't sure how applicable that was going to be to my circumstance. That was also part of the reason why I kind of booked it across the country because it was too complicated. But yeah, it was in the middle of COVID. So, but yes, green books still exist today.
App form?
What was that?
Would it be apps now?
Most likely,
I mean,
I'm sure.
or still physical books?
I'm pretty sure there would be apps for it, but I actually don't know. I haven't even looked. How's about we look right now since we have the time?
I mean,
Is there a Green Book app?
I know somebody a few years ago created Black.
Yeah, there is.
Um, so so
It's called
yeah,
Green Book Global.
all
Is
right.
an app, a travel app designed for the Black community to safely navigate, plan, and review destinations worldwide based on traveling while Black safety scores. Key
Hmm.
features include an AI trip planner, a road trip mapper, identifying sundown towns, and booking options for Black-owned businesses. That is very interesting. I suppose in my limited case, I never even really thought to do this, but I don't really travel that far. Um, but damn, that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
yeah. So there you go. The more you know. I might download this app just to have it. Shit. Um, yeah. Thank you for that. Any other questions?
I have a question. Sorry for not raising my hand.
Okay.
So the question is about the black elites
Yeah.
that would come to America, I mean to the US, and basically they would have granted this status of like free people, and then they could be indentured servants or different jobs. So my question is, how would they then their kids, for example, how would they ensure their safety and their status as these free people? Because I mean, due to racism, would they even be able to just walk around? How would they like even prove? Because apparently they would need to, right? That they're like the kids of these free people. And another like a side question to that, why would these people that would come from Africa would be granted this position in the first place? Were they the people? There is like a big thing going around, and I'm not sure. I don't really know about it, and I missed a couple of lectures in the beginning,
That's okay.
that some people in Africa would essentially sell African people to slavery. So would these be these people if it was true even? That's it.
Yeah, yeah. So, that it's a loaded question with multiple parts, so you'll have to forgive me if I've forgotten elements. Just remind me as I
Sure.
go. Um, so yes, Africans in West Africa, pre-colonial, uh, Africans had a notorious reputation for human trafficking through slavery. It's not the same, it was not the same kind of slavery that we know of in the United States of America. Having said that, that still doesn't mean it's justified. Okay. So,
Mhm.
yes, the same people who had the skills of enslaving and capturing people would then be appointed slave catchers for the transatlantic slave trade. The black people in America during this time who are free are either descendants of people who were always free, they're the descendants of people who earned their freedom, or they're the descendants of people who stole their freedom. Okay, it's a complex mixture of all of those three. Okay, what was the question again? Can you remind me?
The question was if these people that were free in the first place were actually the ones that did the trafficking.
Oh, no. The ones that were doing the trafficking were largely the people who were still in Africa. Okay.
Hmm.
Some of those people would come to the United States. Uh, you could make the argument that some of these free people were their descendants, but I don't really know the logistics around that. I would go so far as to say, in general, the people who I'm talking about here are the descendants of people who were brought here as indentured servants and then earned their freedom. Okay. Or
Okay.
or or people who were granted their freedom after a war. Okay.
Hmm.
Or people who stole their freedom. Now, how do you go about proving that you're free? That's where it gets complicated because you kind of can't. How do you prove a negative, right? If you're free, you're just free. You don't really have paperwork for that, right? The only reason you have paperwork to prove that you're free is because someone who used to own you gave you the paperwork to prove that you're free. So, in essence, then, by being black, you're just basically claiming that you're free with no way to prove it.
Hmm.
Do you get it? So if somebody comes and says, "Hey, you're my slave, and it's time to go back to the plantation, and we've got to prove to a court that you're my slave," well, it's now on you to prove that you're not. How do you do that?
No way to do that, I
Oh,
guess.
it's
But
it's hard. How do you do that? You don't really own land. Most free black people don't own property. So you might be able to prove if you're a property owner that I own this property, therefore I can't possibly be your slave. But most black people don't have that luxury.
hmm
So it just becomes a thing. You're kind of at the mercy of circumstance.
hmm And
Is yeah.
returning to the beginning of your answer quickly. So there are no black people essentially that would come to the United States as free people.
Not I don't want to say no, right? Because there's always
Yeah,
exceptions. But
right.
in general, no.
And they would have to be like if they were supposedly, then they would have to be like at like, some use for the people that would actually, grant them essentially
Yeah,
this.
the like in general, if you have a reputation among this community that you give society some kind of value,
Mm-hmm.
then no one's gonna bother you because they know who you are. But if you're just a black person, right? That's where you'll start to find the pressure and the persecution and the button pushing is because they in general they do not want to be surrounded by black people or even live among them because it's indecent.
So, but if there is value, then it's okay. It's kind of again reminds of maybe
Yes,
a little bit of how things might be a little
yes.
bit.
Then you become the exception,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yes, to some extent. That if you're a black person who maybe you're that famous entertainer who puts on blackface and makes people laugh and blah blah blah. Oh, I love that guy. They're not going to give you any problems.
Mm-hmm.
it,
Thank
it
you.
becomes a thing where it's and like I said, I pointed this out throughout the lecture. There are lots of examples where like these beliefs are not really consistent. They have lots of contradictions. It's almost nonsensical in a way. So it's just you're kind of asserting racial selection whenever you really just feel like it. It's just kind of an emotional thing. It's not logical.
Oh yeah. Oh my, really? It's not even systemic, you're saying, in a way.
Well, it is systemic in that it it permeates the government, the laws, the beliefs, the behaviors. It runs through consistently, but it's just not logically consistent.
It's monarchy then. Like it's random. I
Yeah, it
mean,
is
in a way.
random.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say anarchy almost.
Okay.
It's anarchical, right? There
Right.
aren't even though there are rules, there really aren't any rules. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it's
And
like
even
for
that
an
doesn't really
absolute,
make sense.
it's
What
like
the fuck does that mean?
absolute power.
Yes, in a way, yes.
All right. I'm cutting off. I'm cutting
Okay.
myself off.
Okay. All right. No worries. And please, yeah, I notice a thing, Elena. I just want to tell you this. I notice that before anyone tells you, you automatically assume that you are being an inconvenience, and you're not. So
You're
don't.
very kind. I gotta work with my therapist. Okay, I'm not gonna
Yeah,
say sorry.
we're.
Thank you.
I don't mean to overstep my boundaries, but I
No,
would like to
you're not. It's
politely
nice.
encourage you to work on that because I don't think you're an inconvenience, and frankly, I don't want to hear you assume to yourself that you're an inconvenience. You're not.
Thank you for phrasing it this way and not saying something like, "Oh, you don't have to say sorry." I really hate that phrase. So thanks.
Of
Elena,
course.
this afternoon I watched the video from last week, and I really appreciated all the questions that you asked. And again this week, you always ask great questions. You
Thank
and
you.
Zara had such good questions last week, so
Oh,
keep it
thank
up.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's so nice.
Yeah. Stephanie said there's a movie called Green Book with Mahershala Ali. Took me a while to type on my phone. Oh yeah, you're on your phone. No worries. Yeah, the Green Book movie, I have criticisms of it. In general, I think it's a decent movie, but it's based on a true story. But then it's also highly edited and
Yeah.
fictionalized and yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like the white savior kind of thing that's
Yes.
coming in there, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
watched it when it came out and I'm like, this is not right.
It's one of the movies that made Mahershala Ali famous. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And then Michael said, I heard about a black person renting a car for a trip down south and not wanting an electric car for the same reason you say, yeah, oh, well, yeah, hell yeah. Who wants to take an electric car across country or anything if you've got to sit and stop at a charger and now you've got eyes on you? I wouldn't want to do that. Um, but yeah, anyway, okay. Well, I see there are dwindling numbers. I want to maybe leave room for one more question if there is, but if not, um, okay. So,
Oh, sorry.
oh yeah, no, please
Yeah.
take it away.
So I just wanted to say one thing. We were talking, I came in really late because I was at my dance lesson.
It's okay.
But I grew up in Idaho, so I was educated with sort of the a more broadened kind of education in sense of diversity because I grew up in Moscow,
Okay.
but where the university is, but and my parents were professors. But yeah, I didn't learn until I was 30 something that black people in the north were discriminated against also.
Yeah.
I thought it was only like southern kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was
That's what
enlightening.
it's probably because you came late, which I'm not guilting you for, but I
Right.
was mentioning in the lecture earlier today that there's this notion in American education that like the North was like morally superior,
Right.
and that is absolutely not the case at all when it comes to racism, uh, anything. Um, it just no, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, so when we say that racism is an American cultural hallmark, we mean that through and through. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. And I would go so far as to say, even in progressive states today,
Yes.
there are lingering notions and norms of white supremacy in places like Washington State, Seattle, Portland,
Mm-hmm.
Oregon,
Yeah, even here in
LA. Yeah,
Washington. Yep.
yeah. So it's
LA,
a
yeah.
thing where even as we like to think of ourselves as being morally superior because we're progressive, if you encounter it in just the right way, you can elicit white supremacist ideas from people who identify as progressive. Yeah.
And you read anything on Facebook or Instagram, well, especially Facebook, if you go, like I go to my senator's page, and there are people there that laugh at what she says about Trump and being
Mm,
against everything that he's been doing. And they support him. Like, I applaud my president. I'm behind him all the way. And I'm like, it's prevalent. It's like it permeates that. And there's like half people that are saying bad things and half people, you know, like Patty Murray's things that she says.
yeah.
And it's like there's no such thing as moral. evolution,
No, no.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there is and there isn't, but yes, you're
Right,
absolutely
exactly. I
right.
mean, every
Yeah.
generation's different. So, well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, we're basically at the end, so we'll go ahead and wrap up here for this week. Next week, what are we covering? We are covering what the opposition to slavery looked like. That'll be chapter 8. Let me see how many slides there are. I'll be able to cover chapter 8 in one session. So now that we've talked about what slavery looked like in the South, what being free and black in the North looked like, now we're going to be talking about what the opposition to slavery in the North actually looked like. And the spectrum to the opposition is actually really interesting and insightful. So we'll be talking about that on Sunday. I'll make sure the slides and the scan for the chapter is up if you're interested in reading it. And then I will see you all on Sunday. Thank you for participating. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and comment. All right, everybody, have a good night. Enjoy your Sunday. Take care.